All right, so this is the fourth section of our video lecture, or our video supplements to the module this week in lieu of lecture. And we've been talking about humans interacting with their environment, and the last section really is sort of the moving forward section. So your choices have impact is the theme, and we're all aware that our choices have impact. But as we start to think about how do we make decisions and how do we consider all the factors, so we're going into the systems thinking that we've been doing where we're starting to really look at the whole picture and the evidence that's out there, how do we make the best decisions? Well, certainly your food choices have impact. It's estimated that 27% of greenhouse gas releases from households, from household consumption, household activities, are related to food choices. And so while we know that we have an impact, so the decisions that we're making are having an impact, there's also so much that we don't know about making the best decision. So there's lots of key areas that we need to pay attention to. It may be related to things that are generating emissions, things that are using energy, things that are how are we using the land, what are we using it for, are we deforesting more, what are those activities? And we reach a point where we realize that we need to be asking more questions. So while we are well aware, for example, that we call these the planetary boundaries. We're in a safe operating space. We know we're up here and we're not having a detrimental impact. If we reach this area down here, we know we are having a detrimental impact. And in here, we have this zone of uncertainty where we don't know how much is too much. Where is the boundary and when have we crossed it? So let's move forward and think a little bit about that in terms of an example. So we can do that in a lot of different areas. This image is from an article that was published in Nature. The research came out of the Stockholm Resilience Center, and essentially what they did is they were looking and they were creating estimates of how different control variables, so you can look, there we go, all around, these are each control variables, for 7 planetary boundaries, so kind of that image I showed you before, the planetary boundaries, and looking at how those have changed from 1950 to present. And so in their schematic here, the green is the safe operating space, so that's where we want to be. And they were looking at, looking at where we have already crossed those boundaries, and we have quite a bit of conversation about climate change, and we're well aware that we have pushed beyond that boundary in terms of changes to the earth and their impact on our climate. We do hear quite a bit of conversation about biodiversity loss in our natural environments. One topic that we don't necessarily hear a lot about is our nitrogen cycle, and their primary, or one of the main discussion points in this article, is how we have pushed the nitrogen cycle beyond its boundary, far, far beyond its boundary. So if you recall in the at the end of the first section, the first video, I introduced you briefly to the Haber-Bosch process for artificially fixing nitrogen and making that nitrogen available for crop use, and that is our primary source of synthetic fertilizer for our crops. The contributions from that process, it's contributing reactive nitrogen into the soil, but the contributions are not offset by denitrification. And so the result of that is a disruption in our natural nitrogen cycle, and a disruption that has pushed us well beyond the boundaries of our safe zone. The conclusions in this paper in Nature was that we need a drastic reduction in the fixed nitrogen additions, so the amount of synthetic fertilizer we're putting onto the land. And we can debate whether that is the solution, but this is part of demonstrating where information comes from, how this conversation gets generated, and looking at this as a system. This is one example where we're looking at the nitrogen cycle. We can apply our systems thinking to this. We can look at the strengths, we can look at the weakness, we can look at the opportunities, we can look at the threats, we can look at where we've been, where we are currently, and looking at opportunities for where we can go in the future. We can do this for a variety of topics, as you're going to do as we move forward this semester. And this kind of leads us into where we're going to leave off this week. There's been a proposal that we must have a monumental shift away from business as usual in order to have sustainability, environmental sustainability as we move forward in the future. So what would that look like? Some suggestions for things that we absolutely have to do. Cut carbon emissions by 80% from 2006 levels by 2020, which we're rapidly approaching now. And as we move through the semester, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Stabilize the world's population at 8 billion or fewer by 2040. So you saw the Hans Rosling video where he was looking at populations and the population growth and kind of describing not only the numbers in the population, but the culture and the status and what was available there. Eradication of poverty. Same thing along the same lines, looking at the status of the people and not just the numbers of the people. Restoration of our planet's forests. And so really, as we consider those as opportunities, we have some questions that we need to ask. So do you think this plan is feasible? These are questions for you to ponder as we leave this week. Do you think this plan is feasible? What sort of changes would the American society need to make in order to implement this plan? Say hi. Can you say hi to the video? Talking to my students. Can you say hi?
Hi.
Wave and smile. There you go. Give me just a minute, okay? I'm finishing up. Okay, so what sort of changes would the American society need to make in order to implement these changes? And what sort of changes would our global society need to make in order to implement these changes? With that, we're going to end the introductory part of this module, and we'll see you next week in class.